There we go. Hi everyone, welcome to this week's Art Forum presentation. My name's Matt Warren and I'm one of the academic staff members here at Hunter Street on the southern end of Nicolaou, Tasmania. And I'm here to introduce today's speaker, Kylie Johnson. Firstly, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that I and we here in the Deschanel Theatre are situated on the land alongside the waterways and under the skies of the Tasmanian Aboriginal people, the original inhabitants and custodians of this place. And I also recognise that this forum presentation is travelling north to the state, to the Inverness campus, and potentially across the country and around the world. And with that in mind, it's worth recognising that the history of a place is often a lot longer and a lot older than our own personal timelines. And for here, I want to acknowledge that many, many people did not survive colonisation and that sovereignty was never ceded. And I look forward to a future where there exists a greater sense of the honour it is to live and work on a place with a long Indigenous history. So I would like to now introduce our speaker for today, Kylie Johnson, one of the curators of Hypnotising Chickens, recent video art from Vietnam and Tasmania, and someone with an extensive history in the local art environment with her involvement at Contemporary Art Tasmania in North Hobart and their various activities, local artist-run initiatives and much, much more. And at the risk of appearing like I've benefited from some kind of nepotism, I'm in the exhibition in question, but we all know that Tasmania is quite a small place, so invariably it's going to happen from time to time. And in fact, Kylie and I are from the same town of Burnie on the northwest coast, and in fact did I think it was grade 12 art class together up there. So we've known each other on and off for many years, but it's not nepotism. Okay. So amongst other things, Kylie will discuss this current exhibition, which also features a number of current and former students from this school and how it all came together. So will you please welcome Kylie Johnson.
Okay, should I stand here perhaps?
Yes.
Okay. Hello everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Matt. So as Matt said, I'm the curator at Contemporary Art Tasmania. A lot of the programs that I do there, apart from curating projects, are development projects. So if I don't know you, and I don't know some of you, your faces, and you want to know about anything that's going on at CAT, some of our programs, please get in contact or even come and say hi at an opening. Tonight we've actually got a screening, late night screening of this program. So if you haven't seen this program or you want to come up and see it again, I think the program's an hour 40 through. You can come and go at any time. So I'm here to talk about Hypnotising Chickens, recent video art from Vietnam and Tasmania. The screening program has 12 artists from both locations. It's a partnership between Contemporary Art Tasmania and Saigon Experimental, which is an experimental video organisation based in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City. And this exhibition runs till the 29th of this month. So later in the year, the exhibition will go to Vietnam. And I'm one of the three curators, along with Linh and Pham Nguyen Anh Tú. So firstly, I'd like to talk about the development of the project. Now, I realised when I was reading through my notes today that a lot of this is about the context of the exhibition, but hopefully that will just encourage you to come up and spend time with the work. So increasingly, artists, arts professionals and organisations are seeking connections with their international peers towards progressing their work. Let's do that. Towards progressing their work and sustaining practice. In recent years, CAT's relationship with Southeast Asia has come through projects such as Composing Archipelagos, which was curated by Jasmine Stevens in 2021, and also in 2023 we had Greed Rakus Gurig by Lisa Campbell-Smith. Now both these projects featured Indonesian artists and they were both supported by Project 11. So Project 11's a really interesting organisation, Indonesian-Australian philanthropist organisation based in Australia. Confer Cabo and his wife. So moving on from that, we haven't really done any projects at CAT that involves Vietnam. And I think my love of Vietnam comes from a long-term fascination with a place called Pham. And I think we'll get to the slide of Pham in a moment. So Pham is an artist-led residency initiative, and I've been following them online for a number of years. They provide artists with a place to stay, connection with international and Vietnamese artists, and share their networks. So Pham is run by Mott, which is an artist-run space in Vietnam, and I'd encourage you, if you're thinking of doing a residency, I think we'll get to the slide of that in a moment. This is Pham. Check them out, it might be for you. So 18 months ago, my focus wasn't on developing an art exhibition with work from Vietnam and Tasmania. It was about finding ways for me to go to Vietnam and spend time at Pham. So I believe that the best ideas and practices are generated in collaboration between people and forms of community. And that's one of the things that Pham has in buckets. So this slide is of Nguyen Art Foundation and NAF, and this is an international school. So in my pursuit of visiting Vietnam, I convinced my family and to go on a holiday. We thought it was a good idea to spend a little bit longer in Saigon, and so then I could have the opportunity to visit art spaces, including Pham, to have some first-hand experience of the culture of these spaces. So in the meantime, the stars aligned and Kat was offered to apply for a Gordon Darling domestic travel grant. Gordon Darling, so I contacted the organisation and asked if they'd extend that to international. So great, stars are aligning, and I applied, and another great, I was able to get that grant. So that just enabled a little bit of time, the money to be able to do a self-directed development project at 3 leading independent Vietnamese art organisations, of which NAF was one. So then also at San Art and Mott, with visits to other galleries, organisations, and this took place between April and May last year, so not that long ago. So in the 12 days of research of that program, I was able to, it was quite intense actually. I wouldn't recommend doing a 12-day program. You need to have days off in between there to just gather your thoughts and reflect on things. It was very intense. And also, because I'd not been to Vietnam before, I was very keen on fitting as much in as I possibly could. So all 3 of these organisations, Mott, San Arts and NAF, are known for their close relationships with artists, and all are held in high regard in Vietnam and internationally. And critically, all have evidenced a strong international perspective, so they're wanting to connect internationally. The development program that I proposed involved short, intensive periods in San Art and Mott, and some time at NAF. So that was like studio visits, meetings with the people that worked there, and also probably most important was that downtime where you're able to just hang out at an opening or a screening event, have a meal together. So all of these spaces were designed to increase my knowledge of the cultural and political context of contemporary art in Vietnam. And it really was just dipping my toes in, but I mean, that's all the time I had at that period. So it's also probably important to say that in Vietnam, there's no funding for the arts as we know it here with Creative Australia, so nothing. There are some stipend-style funds I found out that come mostly through art schools or private philanthropy. And so much of the work that's shown in art schools is very traditional practice. So Pham Nguyen, who I showed an image of earlier, and her family, have many businesses, and they've given financially to the arts in Vietnam to develop projects, but they also gave their space. So I was talking about Pham earlier. Pham occurred because 3 of the philanthropists from Mott, SANART and NAF got together and decided that they needed to have these hothouse-style residencies, and NAF just happened to have a factory that wasn't being used at the time. So SANART, which is another, I'll just flick through these. Oh, so SANART, there I am. That's Mary Lou David, and she was fabulous through this whole trip. They were founded in 2007 as an artist-led presentation and development platform, and it is now one of Vietnam's leading art organisations committed to supporting artists and cultural workers. So they've done the past projects they've done. SANART Laboratory and a residency project called Conscious Realities, and they're also very much in that incubator stage of curatorial practice, so sharing knowledge in curatorship. So the organisation is located in a huge swanky hotel across the river, and this image here is, sorry, not a hotel, a residential building, and this image here is inside their space. It's not a huge space. As with most of the access to these spaces, you have to pretty much know where you're going because it's buzzer entry. And so navigating that system was a little bit daunting. So Mary, who I just mentioned a moment ago, the curator of SANART, she was great to talk to. She expanded my head and my thinking and my knowledge about Vietnam and about contemporary experimental practice every time we spoke. So there's a lot that we covered, but I guess 2 of the most important points that I took from talking with Mary was that in Vietnam, so there's rapid economic growth. That doesn't always filter down to most artists, but there's also a lot of money coming into Vietnam. So there's Mott, we'll go back, I think. There's a lot of money coming into Vietnam from organisations like the British Council. I think RMIT also have some affiliations in Vietnam as well. So lots of international activity. And there's also, it's important to say that to gain entry into these communities, maybe this is the same everywhere, but it felt very much more so perhaps here, you have to be introduced. So it was probably a great thing that I went there just to be in this space and to listen without any project or wanting to do anything at that stage. Because there is that, you do actually have to be trusted and introduced to these organisations. So I needed to build relationships, and I think in my experience, we'll go past that one, I think, the most important way to do, or easiest way to do that is to just be in the same space as people. So this is Mott. Mott, as I mentioned, is an artist-run contemporary space in Saigon. They collaborate with artists to assist them in building their practice through hosted exhibitions, residency projects, and they also have quite an extensive +1 program. If you haven't heard of them, they're incredibly dynamic, and I'd encourage you to just, well, I guess in the first instance, check them out online. But since their inception in 2015, Mott has expanded its program to include a series of +1 projects: contemporary art space, nice place to experiment, +1 museum, +1 library, +1 collective, +1 residency, +1 arts advisory. A lot of the money that comes into Mott is private philanthropy, and this space here, we'll go back. This space here that this workshop's taking place in, that's in a huge hotel in Saigon. So I think there was an image a moment ago of Luke Nicholas. He was one of the contacts that I had at Mott, and he was incredibly generous. Every time we went out to dinner, if I was with these guys, everything was half price, which was kind of nice. I also noticed an enormous, I seem to be surrounded by a lot of American accents in Vietnam. It turned out that many of the American men that were part of Mott in that orbit, they'd also done residencies there, and because they were funded, they were able to stay. essentially. But I guess it's important to say that Luke, I was talking to mostly, he's in it for the long haul, and he's got a family there. His wife is Vietnamese, and she's also involved in the organisation. So I was lucky enough to arrive in Saigon at a time when Mott was recommencing AFARM. So that AFARM occurs sporadically and sometimes at short notice. Most of the international artists who join the program bring some funding with them. This is their latest residency space. And so this is in the Amaki Hotel, which is on the 6th floor of the hotel. They've also got studio space here, residential space. There's restaurants down below, and they have workshop areas. This is on the ground floor, I think. So the relationships I've formed primarily with Luke from Mott and Mary Lou from San Arts, and absolutely increased my knowledge of Vietnamese art. So this next slide, okay, so moving along, 10 days before I arrived in Saigon, this gentleman, Nicolaou, he's the founder of San Art and an incredibly influential figure in Vietnam. In fact, I'd say monumental. He died 10 days before I arrived, and because of that, my schedule shifted. I was actually quite looking forward to meeting Din. So he was born in 1968 in Vietnam, in a small village that's close to the border between Cambodia and Vietnam. And in 1978, the Lee family moved to, or immigrated to Los Angeles, because that's when Vietnam invaded Cambodia. So Din made his fortune, and like a lot of people, he gave back to Vietnam. So he was one of the founders of San Art. So it's important to say that while there's collective art culture, in terms of spaces like that we know as artist-run spaces, that's a fairly recent concept there. And San Art was his baby. So his influence in Vietnam is extensive. His work when he was first becoming rich and famous and fabulous, his work was about those sort of little-known narratives about the war, migration, and how this has influenced Vietnam and Vietnamese artists. So I was told when I was there that while there's a lot of Vietnamese that are established artists that are working internationally and they've given back to the country, there'll never be another Din. So a lot of the organisations shut for that period out of respect, which was absolutely fair enough, but quite awkward for me because I was going to embark on my 12 days extensive program. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm in Saigon. So the population of Saigon's around 8.9 million, and the population of Hobart around 250, 260. Vietnam is a socialist republic. It is an authoritarian state ruled by a single party, the Communist Party. And one thing that's really on the surface in Vietnam is the legacy of the American War. So what I would have learned about at school as the Vietnam War. So 1955 to 75. So Australia followed America into the Vietnamese War. And we didn't really pull out until 72. So that's very recent history. And you'll notice that if you come up and see the Hypnotising Chickens program, that there's footage that relates very strongly to that war. So while I was in, I think I'll go to the next slide. So this is the type of practice that is coming out of a lot of the art schools that I'm noting. I'm not saying there's not video. I'm not saying that there's not experimental practice, but there's just more of the traditional practice, and that's supported in the spaces. So in Vietnam, I get there the 30th of April and of having the reunification day, and I think I've got some images of that when we go forward. So I'm in Saigon. There's a heat wave. Yep, this is the festivities. It was quite a mad situation. A couple of points I can't overstate. So the rapid rate of change. And And I think this is occurring over all areas of Vietnamese society, but it's certainly happening in the arts. There's more and more artist organised activity occurring, and that's predominantly from what I was seeing through sound-based spaces, spaces that are attached to cafes. It really is a grassroots level space. So, and I was quite interested in if these art spaces were stomping ground for art students, and I was told that there are very few art students that go into those artist-run spaces. The vast majority, so this is quite a good slide. I drank a lot of coffee while I was there. That's a Delat black coffee over ice. It was ridiculously hot. Navigating a space when you're a cool climate person, navigating a space that is that hot and trying to fit a lot into a program was a challenge. Anyway, so the vast majority of the contemporary artworks that I saw, as I've said, were historical. Perhaps everywhere, if you scratch the surface of any experimental art organisation, you see a web of people. So I just talked about the huge populations in Vietnam, but what I was noticing was that I was coming across the same people in many organisations. So, for example, Mary Lou David, curator at San Art, also a curator at Saigon Experimental. So Pham and San Art are probably in a somewhat precarious position. As I mentioned, San Art Gallery is in an apartment, big swanky complex. It's owned by Đình, but now he's died, so there's a little bit of a question mark about how they'll move forward. And also Pham in the Amaki Hotel, they're always moving from spaces to spaces, usually when one is offered to them. So now I'm back in Hobart and I'm mulling over ideas in my head about how organisations like CAT can support artists to create their own international peer-to-peer networks. How can I leverage my relationships that I'm building in Vietnam to potentially build pathways for artists? And in my experience, you often need to work towards these ambitious programs just by starting, which is the hardest thing, and then build up to them. So perhaps I guess it's also about hoping that the stars align. So at this stage there was no Hypnotising Chickens to show, but a project in the Cat Gallery needed to be rescheduled. So a period became available in March 2025 and with it a small amount of money. So seize the day. I had conversations with San Art and Mott and eventually started working with Linh and Tú. I hadn't actually met Linh and Tú when I was in Vietnam, but because I'd formed these relationships through San Arts and Mott, we were able to connect online. It's a strange thing getting to know somebody online. I'm sure that's what people do, but I don't have a huge amount of experience in that area, and it was a little bit challenging to start with. And also because of the cultural differences and the time frames. So we often were Zooming quite late at night. So Lin's an independent curator in Vietnam, but so he's a founding member of Saigon Experimental, but he's also an artist and he's living and working in Germany at the moment. So the short timeline and the small budget created boundaries for the project. We chose to site the project within experimental video. We all knew artists that were working in video, and there was also that wonderful thing about no freight. Freight costs are just crushing exchange projects. So we started sharing video files, talking about the work, the things we wanted from working together. We saw great value in showing intergenerational work, so also including underrepresented artists with more established artists. And we made the decision not to limit the program to a particular form of video. So I guess one thing about, I don't actually work on survey shows that often, but it is actually a really enjoyable space. So what I mean about a survey show is that it's sort of taking the temperature or seeing what's out there. We didn't limit ourselves to medium or to, apart from video, but you'll notice that there's music videos in the exhibition, alongside longer documentary style works. There's a lot of work that splices historical footage in with current footage, some found footage. We've got a 26-minute video right beside a 2-minute video. So while I'm now showing images from the Hypnotising Chickens exhibition, I guess it's important to say that we had to limit the number of videos that were in the program. As I said before, it's 1:40 to get through all of the videos. And we originally sort of decided we'd stick with 7 videos each, so 7 artists' works each. So that would be 14 works. But there was a problem with one of the Vietnamese works that they were having trouble getting released for the images that they were in their work. And also, if I'm going to put together an exhibition that's got Tasmania in the title, so a survey-style exhibition from Tasmania, I would think it's important to have Aboriginal representation. Unfortunately, the work by the Aboriginal artists, we were all ready to go, and then we thought a little bit more about the context. And because that particular fabulous video work, but because of the context of that work sitting in the context of this exhibition, the deep trauma that was associated with that, it just didn't feel like the right fit. And that video then has to have its own space. So then we got the program down to 12. I guess that it's probably important to say that when we're dealing with putting the program together, there was no shortage in finding video artists' work, but the eclectic nature of the program, I think music videos beside documentary work, it really was a difficult thing splicing those works together. When you're looking at anything like that, so we've got an 1:40 program. Sometimes within the program you'll notice that there's really hard cuts, so there'll be something that will be quite a meditative work alongside something that will be quite bombastic. So following on from this line of thinking, I particularly like Lynn's take here. She suggested putting Lêna, Precious Rare for Sale work in front of Hannah Foley's Wet Breath Exchange. So reflecting on how the filmmakers have portrayed the environment. So there was all these threads going through the work, and there's some wonderful scenes, the lush green fabulousness of Vietnam and the plastic and the waste, alongside images from Tasmania, landscapes from Tasmania. So this work here, so while early ethnographic films shot by the French depicted the Vietnamese, oh, we've gone too far, shot by the Vietnamese showed the Vietnamese jungle, untouched, primitive. The capture on screen by property developers, and a lot of this footage, found footage, is of, I've gone too far again. So the work, both of these works show the beauty of and the lush green landscape of Vietnam, but also the terrible, ugly landscapes and the human impact on those landscapes. So these thoughts still rolling around in my head when we get to Hannah Foley's work, Wet Breath Exchange. So this is documentation of a performance. And in Hannah's words, the Bridgewater Jerry performs a slow suspension, exhale iteration of the Derwent River flow. The breath within the Jerry is an act of embodied exchange, watery bodies taking turns to hold and be held within the other. So in the same way that Lêna's work on Vietnam is at times seductive because of its beauty, it was really nice to be able to show the beauty of Hobart within that space. So there's not any time today to really talk about all of the works, but I'd encourage you to come up and look at them again either tonight or in the next week. There's also extra information if you want to go down those rather enjoyable wormholes where you find out about the artist's work, and it's quite easy to access that via the CAP website room sheet. So the program will be shown in Vietnam later this year. Now, I don't know where in Vietnam yet, which is a really interesting and unusual way to be working in partnership. basically Vietnam's going through a similar issue in terms of property and access to property is what we're going through here. So not just residential, but the rents for galleries are going up. And there's been a number of galleries shut in Saigon that both Linh and Tu had connection with and were going to show this work. So I don't know where it will be shown yet, but hopefully that will happen this year. So I'm also heading back to Vietnam in September, and I don't know what's going to happen with Hypnotising Chickens or these pathways for artists, but I'm quite hopeful that with developing these relationships that we can take it further. And I think that's all I've got to say right now. But we can have a conversation, especially because the videos are still rolling in. Would anybody like to ask me any questions? Nobody wants to even know about the title.
Hang on. We'll use the mic if we can, because we're going via Zoom and we've got the recording.
Okay, great.
Before we get on to the questions, can we just thank Kylie for her...
Oh, okay.
Okay, so, sorry, back to... Where was it?
Why is it called Hypnotising Chickens?
I'm pleased you asked. Well, we didn't actually start off with it being a survey show. We started off trying to pull some threads together, and it was going to be around those environmental spaces. But when we were looking at the work, it didn't neatly fit into that package. So we got to that horrible point where how are we going to... We've got all these different works dealing with different subject matter. How are we going to pull this together? And we came up with some really boring names. I was listening to Iggy Pop's Lust for Life, which was playing before this, and I started to think that another way of titling it would just be to actually try and reflect the energy in the program, so the dynamism and the energy. And I think that's what that title says to me. So that might be the long answer. And we're back where we started.
Was that a ping of a message appearing?
No, it was basically because I pressed the wrong button, I think.
That's the question. And then I've got a question.
Kylie, could you talk a little bit about the curatorial process in terms of being 3 curators? Did you have specific roles? Did you all have different kind of needs in terms of the curatorial premise? Was there a premise or, yeah?
Well, to start with, there wasn't. Then we went through a process of trying to make a premise. And I guess the biggest stumbling block for me was that we didn't know each other. And so we had to get to know each other very quickly via Zoom. As I said, it's not my preferred way of getting to meet somebody. And we actually bonded, I guess, over the works. So we just talked about the works. We just showed each other videos. And it quickly became evident that we were luckily on the same page. And I think that's down to Mary Lou David, who's the Sound Arts curator, because she was the one who connected us. So we were off to a pretty good start there. And I think that it's, while it's not an ideal way to develop an exhibition in my mind, it was awfully exciting to just have access to all these videos and all this work that I wouldn't have normally had access to, and I wouldn't have been able to find myself. I mean, we had quite established Vietnamese artists that was on Fulbright scholarships, and then we had a guy that lives in the mountains who hadn't 2-minute video that hadn't been shown before, that was shot on his phone. And I mean, there's a lot of trust involved in that as well. They were really responsive to the Tasmanian work. One of the concerns I had to start with was that, okay, we've got huge population differences here. They're going to have access to a lot more work than I am. But the Tasmanian art sat beside the Vietnamese art really well. And then it was just a case of, we need the same as what you would do putting anything together, an exhibition or an artist from space or anything. We just had to talk all the time. So lots of emails, lots of Zooms.
I wonder if I can change tack. I don't need to stand up. I can stay sitting down. You started off, Kylie, just mentioning the fact that you and Matt were in a year 12 art class together.
Well, that's a terrible thing. We've got to that already.
No, it's okay. I'm not gonna dig for kind of,
Okay,
embarrassing schoolyard stories. But I did wonder, because I know that there's folks in the room who are, will be considering, what do I do after
sure.
I do a BFA? What are my pathways? What are my job opportunities? Would it be okay if you just spoke a little bit about your particular case? What happened to you?
To me, I was about to talk about Matt. I would have much more enjoyed that. Can I just sort of get into that eventually? But I just wanted to say, because when this sort of dovetails from your question as well, Matt, a lot of that time when I was talking to the curators, I was talking about my proximity to the artists and their artist work. So it was all those backstories. And Matt, I've known your practice for a long time. Your output across music, your radio, and your visual arts practice. So that was a really easy place to go to. And then you had somebody like Reece, where I didn't know your practice for over that long-term space. And so that was quite interesting, pulling those two threads together. So in terms of my journey, what a horrible word. So I was always going to go to art school. I wasn't sure how that was going to happen. Left Burnie, came to art school. It's interesting that here I am much later on from that period, and I still believe essentially in those fundamental things. The best projects, the best practice, the best ideas come through community. And so the art school was really great for me because I was developing communities of people and we were making things happen. And I'm hoping that you didn't ask that question, Neil, so that I could name drop you in there because I'm coming to...
No, but feel free.
So Neil was also at art school when I was at art school, this art school. And at some point I was finishing my honours degree, I think it was honours or undergrad, probably honours. And I'd gone and studied elsewhere and came back, and I was really interested in starting up an artist-run space. And at that time there was Letitia Street Studios, which was more of a studio space, but not as an artist-run space gallery completely as we know it. So I gathered a group of people together that I thought were interesting and doing good things, and Neil was one of those, and we started up In Flight, which became Constance a number of years later. The stars align. I didn't know what I was going to do after art school. I always knew I would be continuing to do art, but I didn't know that I would get into curatorship. I still think of myself as an artist, but my making practice was some time ago. And I was lucky enough through those projects, curating, to then be offered to do a fill-in gig at CAT years ago. And from then I went to Sydney, ended up working at Art Space, then a job came up at CAT and I came back. So that's a sort of a cobbled together version. Looking back, I've been quite lucky. Everything that I've worked quite hard, but you can work quite hard and things don't happen. So, and they've all happened through the relationships that I've built with people. That's the answer.
Thank you. Is there anyone listening in online who would like to ask a question? If so, please do feel free to jump online.
Can I jump in from Impress? Can you hear me?
Go for it.
Excellent. Just picking up on that theme of relationships, Kylie, could you talk a little more about, I guess, the potential that you see coming out of this exhibition and what you might like to pick up next, both in terms of working with the artists who've been involved in this project, but a little more about what you see as the possibilities for further connection.
Hello. Ideally, the plan is to somehow make or set the condition for pathways for artists, for peer-to-peer exchange with artists. So in order to get there, this was sort of the first project. In order to get there, there has to be a track record in this space. We need a lot more money. So on the back of this project, at some point we'll be applying for funding to be able to continue those relationships with Vietnam. Now, ideally, it would be multi-mediums. It would be an artist from Vietnam coming here and an artist from here going to Vietnam. Now, I'm particularly interested in that residency space because I think it's really great for people to live in a community for a certain amount of time to be able to get the most out of that exchange space. So that would be my hope. Now, it's kind of a weird thing to be saying that publicly because you can have these hopes, but you never know if the stars are going to align, whether you're going to be able to get the funding or whether the other connections are going to work out. But I'm hopeful. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. I'm Jess.
Hi, Jess.
Hello. You've used the phrase "the stars aligned" or "the stars didn't align" quite a few times.
Yeah.
And I'm quite interested in what the kind of, I guess, metaphysical perspective you have is behind that. And to give some context, it might be a bit of an abstract question, but we're here at university learning how to make art. So it sounds like there's some sort of process that the university can prescribe and go, if you do this and this and this, you'll probably be successful. And if you don't do the things we teach you, you might be successful, but you probably won't be. Like we're here paying money, right, to be taught by people who know how to make art. So that suggests there's some prescribed method or toolbox or something. But the way you've spoken about it, you've said the stars aligned, the stars didn't align. You've said the phrase, you can work really, really hard, but sometimes nothing happens.
Yep.
And you've said you can have hopes, but sometimes it doesn't come through.
Yep.
So to you, what is the key to making art that, I guess, works or does what you want it to do? Is it just that there's some kind of cosmic order to things and sometimes you do things at the right time and sometimes you don't and it's just luck? Or is it that there's some way to tap into those streams of inspiration, or is it there's something else? I don't know.
Well, you've just scared me by...
Good. Ex-philosophy student.
You've just scared me by the breadth of the question. Because there's so many... I've got so many viewpoints on all of many of the aspects I pulled out of what you were saying then. But I have no idea if there is a right or a wrong. And I often preface when I speak to people, particularly when I'm talking about their art, that I may not be right. I'm just going to give you a viewpoint. I think working in art schools as a student, or as a lecturer as well, but being in art schools is really important. It's kind of like an indoctrination into the language that we can use to talk about our work, to write about our work. Whether you succeed within that art school space or not, when I studied I'll jump about a little bit. When I studied in Glasgow, I went to Glasgow because Douglas Gordon was a lecturer there. He didn't turn up to any of the classes. I later found out that his idea was that it wasn't as important on who your lecturers were. You'd hope that they're fabulous, but they may not be. It was more important with getting the right cohort of people together, and I do believe in that as well. So jumping to the next bit, when I talk about the stars align, I don't want to get too abstract here, but things out of my control have to stack up. And when they do, that's great. Something can happen, whether it's a project, whether it's meeting the right person, whether it's having a really great meal. It can be anything, but some things are just not in my control. And so when I talk about the stars aligning, that's the context I mean it in. I feel like I should talk about something else in that question, but I may have lost the thread now. Well, for us to have that conversation, we'd have to decide what great art is, and we're never going to have that time. I also think it's great when your art has an audience and it's received well, but I don't know too many people that just make art for an audience.
We need to start wrapping it up now. I'll just chip in there if I may, and who I love and respect deeply once gave me the best advice, which was make art for your family. And then nothing else seems to matter, but I don't know whether that will stack up completely. I just want to mention again that there's the screening at CAT this evening. What time?
So that starts at 6 o'clock, but it's basically the program's going to roll through. And we all know each other now, so if you'd like to come up and have a chat, opening that space up to that as well.
And also, although in slight conflict to that, we do have an opening down at the Plimsoll Gallery tonight. The exhibition title is, remind me? Articulate Matter. I was going to say Vibrant Matter. Articulate Matter, that opens, I think, at 5:30. So lots going on, some great exhibitions. Please join me in thanking Kylie again.
Thank you.